We'll call to order the Subcommittee on Communications and Technology, and certainly want to welcome our members and our witness, the Chairman of the Federal Communications Commission, Mr. Wheeler. We're delighted that you would make time to come and spend with us on this important day with so much going on in the telecommunications world. 6 months ago, this subcommittee met for the very first time with the current complement of FCC commissioners and welcomed Mr. Wheeler as the new chairman. Today, and let me welcome Mr. Wheeler back, we meet to review the record of action and selective inaction that the Commission has taken under the first 6 months of your leadership. Unfortunately, given some of the most recent actions out of the Commission, I fear that we may be heading into some rough waters. When we last met, I offered 2 pieces of advice to Chairman Wheeler and his colleagues. First, I urged them to heed the words of Congress where it has spoken and reject calls to act in ways contrary to congressional intent. Second, I urge them to bear in mind that even seemingly small changes in the Federal Communications Commission's rules can have significant impact on the marketplace. I called upon all the members of the Commission to discharge their duties with transparency, accountability, and a long view of the technological landscape. In sum, my advice was that they must approach their duties with humility and restraint. Unfortunately, recent actions have hinted that my advice was ignored. In December, we had yet to know that the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals would once again reject the Commission's attempt to regulate the Internet and could only speculate as to whether the Commission, under Chairman Wheeler's lead, would mount a third attempt. Sadly, we now know the answer. Not only is Chairman Wheeler leading us down this path again, the item the Commission adopted last week tees up the long-dead idea that the Internet is a common carrier. This reinvigorated willingness to consider regulating the Internet under Title II of the Communications Act, rules that find their roots in the 19th century railroad regulation and were designed to regulate the world of a telephone monopoly. Harken back to a world in which twisted copper was the only portal for consumers, the communications network, and voice the only service. The modern communications landscape bears no resemblance to the world Title II was meant to regulate, and application of Title II to the Internet is at best a poor fit. Worse still, the practical consequences of reclassification are to give the bureaucrats at the FCC the authority to second-guess business decisions and to regulate every possible aspect of the Internet. We should all pause and consider the prospect of the FCC as a rate-setting authority over Internet access and what that means for innovation in the telephone network of yesteryear. We should also be aware that this path opens the door for states to regulate the Internet. Contrary to any intended effect, the reclassification of broadband service under Title II will harm consumers, halt job creation, curtail innovation, and stifle investment. In sum, at a time when the Commission, at Congress's direction, is taking steps toward even greater growth and innovation across Internet access platforms, the Commission is simultaneously contemplating rules that undermine those very efforts and compromise the fundamental approaches of both the Clinton and Bush administrations that laid the foundation for the Internet that we know today. As troubling as some of the actions taken under Chairman Wheeler's watch, the selective inaction of the FCC is equally troubling. Although required under the Telecommunications Act, the Federal Communications Commission has failed to complete its quadrennial review of the limitations on ownership of broadcast properties. It's been 6 years, since the Commission last fulfilled this statutory mandate. Rather than focus on ensuring that the rules reflect reality, however, the Chairman has now announced that the Commission would essentially scrap the 2010 quadrennial review and begin in earnest its 2014 quadrennial review. Now, notwithstanding this stale record, the FCC also moved forward to make major changes to the regulations that govern media ownership anyway. The adopted changes to its attribution rules that determine how to count stations toward the local television ownership rule. The FCC also stated that it would begin counting certain shared service agreements toward the local ownership cap. In order to comply with local ownership rules, these pronouncements will likely force broadcasters to divest stations and unwind shared service agreements that are beneficial to ensuring local content in the smaller markets. These changes do not bring benefits to the community served by these broadcasters, drawing into question how this change could serve the public interest. Finally, FCC process reform has been an ongoing priority of our subcommittee. It's an issue my colleagues and I are deeply invested in, as demonstrated by the unanimous passage in the House of the bipartisan Federal Communications Commission Process Reform Act on March 11th of this year. Unfortunately, after the events of the past few months, I'm sad to say I continue to be troubled by the FCC's seemingly flawed process. In March, the FCC chose to restrict license transfers involving certain shared service agreements, which had long been implicitly blessed by the Commission. This action was not debated by the commissioners, nor is it subject to any kind of vote. Rather, it was announced by the chief of the Media Bureau as a fait accompli. Recent press reports also allege the chairman's office withheld presentation of revisions to the Open Internet notice of proposed rulemaking from Republicans for as long as 24 hours, after having provided the material to the Democratic commissioners and to the press during the run-up to the May 15th FCC open meeting. The concern raised by these reports is only compounded by revelations that a substantially revised draft of another item scheduled for vote at the open meeting was not presented to other offices until the closing minutes of the evening before. According to Commissioner Pai's dissent from the Commission's mobile spectrum holdings item, his office received the revised item fewer than 12 hours before the open meeting, and the item contained more than 3,000 revisions. So I find myself channeling Commissioner Rosenworcel, who said of the Open Internet NPRM that the, quote, process that got us this rulemaking today is flawed, quote, close quote. The committee has opined in the past that withholding of a revised draft item from other members of the Commission until the 11th hour precludes the scrutiny and analysis necessary for reasoned decision-making. It's my hope that these occurrences were anomalies. Perhaps Chairman Wheeler will want to commit today to providing his fellow commissioners with adequate and equal time to review proposed orders and rules. The transformative impact of the evolution of technology from analog to digital, from narrowband to broadband, has forever altered our lives. The evolution continues, and the Commission has before it the issues I just mentioned and many more, all significant in their impacts on our lives and the economy. You stated in your written testimony you're eager to build on the progress of the last 6 months going forward, and I hope working together we can move forward in a direction that protects the success this critical sector of the economy has enjoyed and facilitates its continued growth and job creation unencumbered by regulatory overreach. With that, I yield back, and I recognize my friend and colleague from California, Ms. Eshoo, the ranking member of the subcommittee, for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to all of my colleagues, and welcome back to the committee, Chairman Wheeler. Before we do a deep dive into the specifics of the Chairman's proposal, as well as so many other major issues that are before the FCC, I think that it would be well for us to step back and appreciate what I believe is one of the most consequential inventions in human history. This was dreamed of and built by disruptors. It's an American story. It's a product of American genius, the Internet. One word, but it really takes one's breath away in terms of the arc of history. It's not only an invention, it has reshaped lives, economies here and around the world, and our thinking and our debate today really should be viewed, I think, through the prism of a critical step that we're taking now in the 21st century. The Internet is a continuum of change. It's accessible, it's open, and its innovations continue. They empower individuals, entire fields of learning, growing not only our economy, but economies around the world, and serving humanity in countless ways. All of this has taken place, and here we are in the second decade of the 21st century. So this is huge. This is huge. This is not what is behind door number 1, door number 2, door number 3, where the price is right. This is not some guessing game. This is huge. This is something, these decisions are going to affect every single American going forward, just as it has in the past, and it will continue to. So all of us, regulators, innovators, consumers, legislators, we have to get this right. The stakes are very high, and America cannot lose. It's been our leadership that has advanced the digital age. And now is not the time, and actually, I don't think there should be ever a time to unravel the values that have really been the hallmarks and the bulwark of the Internet. So the question is, how do we seize the future? At least in my view, that's what the question is. I know what I want to see continue: openness, free, accessible. These are also the hallmarks of our democracy. And that's why this has been such an extraordinary export of our country. I know what I don't want. I don't want this to become an auction selling off the best in bits and pieces, where some pay for faster lanes, others can't pay. They get stuck in a slow lane. Some giant company blocking content and others discriminating so that they can sell their stuff to keep the other guy's stuff stymied. That's not a very pretty description, but it's a street description of what can be at hand. I want every day to be essentially the 4th of July for American innovation, so that it just keeps bursting. It just keeps bursting. And I see it every day in my congressional district. Looking forward 10 years, 25 years, 50 years, I want this to continue, and we should all be thinking on a grand scale, because this growth and this economic driver should be for everyone. We need smart, savvy regulations, regulatory decisions. We need a Congress that's engaged in this and a Congress that's vigilant, and I plan to be. So what should the FCC do? I think in all the articles you read, there's a debate. Should it be 706 or should it be Title II? I think that we have to have a clear-eyed understanding of what has made the Internet what it is today and what basic values need to be protected and preserved, and then what that is going to look like. And there's more on top of all of this. Can anyone here today piece together the effects of a Comcast-Time Warner merger and an AT&T DirecTV merger on consumers and a free and open Internet? These are massive decisions and massive pieces that are moving forward. And what's going to happen to innovation? Mr. Chairman, Chairman Walden, I urge you to convene a hearing to examine these issues here. I think they deserve to be examined and to be debated and questions asked. So, as I said earlier, every person in the country will be affected by the outcome of these decisions that are before the Commission and before us. And so I look forward to questioning Chairman Wheeler today. I also ask for unanimous consent that two very important letters be entered into the record. One signed by more than 100 venture capitalists and angel investors who support simple, strong, enforceable rules against online discrimination and access fees, and the other signed by more than 100 Internet companies, small and large, mostly small, that support a free and open Internet.
Without objection.
And I don't know if I have any time remaining. No, I think I've gone over. Well, with that, I'll yield back what I don't have.
Thank the gentlelady for her opening statement and the letters. We'll now turn to the full committee chairman, Mr. Fred Upton from Michigan, for opening comments.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Oversight is a critical part of this committee's work to foster a smaller, more nimble government for the innovation age. We've held lots of hearings with all of the FCC's commissioners to address issues of national importance, to keep a close eye on the budget, and to ensure that Commission process focuses on promoting jobs and innovation. And today's oversight hearing with Chairman Wheeler will continue that discussion to ensure that the FCC works in a way that benefits consumers, industry, and certainly the economy, and I thank you for coming today. There's a lot to discuss. In the 6 months since Mr. Wheeler was confirmed as chair, he has addressed a number of items, including media ownership, the IP transition, universal service, and just this past week, of course, the incentive auctions and net neutrality. While I appreciate the Chairman's leadership on some of these, I have serious concerns with some others. As an initial matter, Chairman Wheeler started off his chairmanship with a review of FCC procedure, an issue that this subcommittee has spent lots of time working to reform in a bipartisan manner. But I was disappointed to see some of the process failures that occurred last week. Media reports of an open meeting item being circulated to commissioners as late as midnight the evening before the vote on one item, and what seems to be partisan sharing of items with Democrats as much as 24 hours before sharing them with Republicans on another is particularly concerning. Regardless of political affiliation, commissioners must be given adequate and equal time to consider the items on which they're going to vote. Let us all hope that such incidents of favoritism and selective sharing are isolated and not emblematic of the Chairman's new operating procedure. Additionally, I continue to be concerned with the Commission's ongoing defiance of its statutory obligations to complete the 2010 quadrennial review of media ownership rules. Despite the Commission's woefully outdated record on this issue, it has nonetheless moved forward with changes that effectively bar joint sales agreements and change Commission treatment of shared service agreements under its media attribution rules. These actions, in the absence of the statutorily required media ownership review, do raise significant questions about the Commission's commitment to making decisions informed by facts and utilizing sound process. And lastly, I am troubled by the Chairman's insistence on attempting to regulate the Internet under rules that were informed by 19th century railroad regs and adopted to regulate the monopoly telephone network of the past. The Internet has indeed flourished under the current light touch regulatory scheme, and subjecting it to burdensome regs is a leap in the wrong direction. Title II is inappropriate for the Internet, and attempting to reclassify it would be harmful to consumers, businesses, and the future of the Internet as we know it. Nobody wants telephone service to look like it did in 1984, and we certainly shouldn't wish for our Internet access to return to that rotary phone era either. The communications sector is vital to our national economy, and Commission action on even small items can have broad impact. Thank Chairman Wheeler for being here today. Look forward to working together toward a bipartisan, measured, transparent, and responsible actions that do benefit consumers, job creation, and our economy. And I'll yield my balance of my time to be split between Mr. Latta and Mr. Barton.
Well, thank you, Chairman, for yielding, and Chairman Walden, I appreciate you holding this hearing today, and welcome Chairman Wheeler. Thanks for being here. The communications and technology industry is heralded as a vibrant, dynamic, and productive sector of our economy. This is not by accident. As networks and services transition to IP-based platforms, they've had the flexibility to grow, advance, and evolve in large part because they have not been subjected to the stifling hand of legacy government regulation. We pursued a light touch regulatory approach to the Internet ecosystem because we've seen time and again that it serves as a catalyst for increased investment, innovation, job creation, and competition. As we look forward to develop policies that would further this growth, we'd be remiss to overlook the significance of how regulatory restraint has been fundamental component of the industry's success. That's why I'm concerned with some of the proposals emerging from the FCC, particularly in consideration to reclassifying broadband Internet access service as telecommunications service under Title II of the Communications Act. This policy would be an extreme exercise of government overreach and likely result in failed websites, downgraded, and poor customer service, less choice, and flexibility for consumers, businesses, and stifling of innovation through regulation. Unwarranted attempts to manufacture and shape markets' outcomes, propose solutions in search of problems, or impose antiquated regulations will frustrate future progress and innovation. I intend to introduce legislation that prevents the FCC from following through on this misguided regulatory proposal. Mr. Chairman, with that, I yield back the balance of my time. And I yield to Mr. Barton.
My time. We just welcome Chairman Wheeler, and the question before the committee today is, are we soon going to be calling him Mr. Wheeler Dealer? But with that, I'll put my statement in the record, and in the interest of time, yield back to the Chairman.
Thank the Chairman. Gentleman yields back. Now turn to the gentleman from California, Mr. Waxman, for opening comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to welcome back Chairman Wheeler. The Federal Communications Commission had an historic week last week You are tackling some of the most complex and pressing issues in the communications sector today. In 2012, Congress gave the FCC a big job: create the world's first incentive auction to ensure that beachfront low-band spectrum is put to its highest economic value. And you established the ground rules for this crucial auction last week. You had a hard job because you needed to balance four potentially conflicting objectives. One, maximizing the amount of spectrum made available for auction. Two, promote competition. Three, create bands of unlicensed spectrum to spur innovation. And four, raise money. It appears you hit this one out of the ballpark. I particularly want to commend you for your work to advance unlicensed spectrum. Your plan will create 3 channels of beachfront unlicensed spectrum throughout the nation. The vision of new super Wi-Fi can now become a reality. I also want to commend you for promoting competition by reserving spectrum for competitive carriers. It would be an enormous setback for innovation and consumers if the incentive auction turns the wireless market into a duopoly dominated by Verizon and AT&T. This auction is the best and possibly the last chance the FCC has to invigorate competition. I would have preferred if you reserved even more spectrum for competitive carriers, but I recognize the pressures you are under and your need to secure 3 votes. By the way, you may hear arguments today from Republicans on this committee that you lack the authority to promote competition. These claims are nonsense and contradict the express language of the statute. Last week, you also launched the FCC's 3rd attempt in 8 years to protect the open internet. You didn't hit this one out of the park, but you didn't need to either. You made a wise decision to solicit comment on a wide range of options. As I wrote you, the time has come to end the legal gymnastics and stop the lobbying games being played by the big broadband providers. In 2010, Verizon, AT&T, and Comcast pled with the FCC not to use its undisputed authority under Title II of the Communications Act. And then, after FCC did what they wanted, Verizon sued the agency for lacking authority when the FCC agreed with the company. This time, you need a different approach. You should use your Title II authority as a backstop authority to protect the open internet. If you want to proceed under Section 706 as your main legal theory, that's fine. But you shouldn't water down the open internet rules to fit Section 706. Instead, you should get the substance right and invoke Title II as an independent basis of authority. The FCC has already lost 2 rulings in court over the open internet. You don't have to choose between weak rules and a weak legal case. You can issue strong rules and have a strong legal case if you use a belt and suspenders approach to the next rulemaking. I look forward to exploring this issue with you further in the question period. In the meantime, I want to yield the balance of my time to my friend and colleague, Congressman Matsui.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member Waxman, for yielding me time, and welcome, Chairman Wheeler. The FCC certainly has a lot on its plate. The Commission is considering net neutrality rules, rules on the broadcast incentive auction, the AWS-3 auction, USF and E-rate reforms, and 2 very significant mergers. I'm confident the FCC will be able to demonstrate that it can walk and chew gum at the same time. This subcommittee should also do its part. For one, I join in calling for the chairman to hold oversight hearings on the 2 proposed mergers between Comcast and Time Warner and on AT&T and DirecTV. Both are some of the largest mergers in our nation's telecommunications history. Americans, including many in my district of Sacramento, are seeing the trends towards consolidation, content and peering deals, and how they hear phrases like paid prioritization and wondering what is going on. What does all this mean for them, for competition, and for the economy? It has been encouraging that so many Americans are speaking up in support of protecting an open internet. I was one who thought the FCC should have taken more time to deliberate on what net neutrality rules the Commission should propose. But we are where we are. The proposal has certainly improved over the last few weeks. It is still far from perfect. I support a ban on paid prioritization deals. We can't afford a two-tiered internet system. I look forward from hearing from you today, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back the balance of her time, and with that, you've heard from us, or at least a few of us up here, Mr. Chairman, and now we're delighted to have you here, and we look forward to your opening statement and comments, and thank you again for the work you're doing. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee. As you've pointed out, it's been about 6 months since we last sat down, and what I wanted to do was to highlight some of the things that we have done in that period, and then engage in a dialogue with you with whatever topics that you would like to address. As has been evidenced by a lot of these comments up here, one of the principal responsibilities of the Commission is dealing with the spectrum crunch. And we have taken a significant step forward in terms of getting more spectrum out to the market. We had the H-Block auction, which raised $1.5 billion for 10 megahertz of spectrum. We have opened a new 100 megahertz swath in the 5 gigahertz band, which is already being referred to as gigabit Wi-Fi because of the incredible throughput that it enables. We have begun a proceeding on spectrum sharing in 3.5 gigahertz, and we announced yesterday that in accord with the mandate of this committee and Congress to auction off AWS 3 spectrum, that we will begin the auction on November 13th, and we will finish, as per your mandate, February 22nd. We will license February 22nd, 2015. We have also, as some of the committee had noted, established a new set of mobile spectrum holding rules, which have been praised by everybody from public interest groups to small operators to large operators, as was commented by Mr. Waxman, hitting the ball out of the park. And we have begun the incentive auction process. It's, you mandated us, as you've said, with a non-trivial task, and we have taken the first important steps to that. On the question of universal service and what's going on there, we have fulfilled the pledge that I made to this committee last time we were together to eliminate the infamous quantile regression analysis, and we're seeking comments on what its replacement should be. We have funded the Connect America Fund to provide connectivity to 5 million more Americans who do not have access to broadband today. That's about a third of the total, and a significant bite out of that. And we're seeking input on multiple additional issues. Throughput standards, should we, as technology increases and bandwidth increases, do we need to think about higher bandwidth that is supported by the Connect America Fund? How do we best deal with the mobile component of broadband delivery in Connect America? And how best to support broadband for rate of return carriers. Those are all proceedings that we have underway. We have made some significant strides also in the area of public safety. We took a good chunk out of the FirstNet $7.5 billion with the H-band auction. Expect, obviously, that the AWS 3 auction will do more, and I wouldn't be surprised if we show up at the incentive auction having met the requirement, or at least taken a huge bite out of the requirement for funding FirstNet. We had a rulemaking on text to 911. You know, phones aren't used just for talking anymore, but texting. And so if you want to text to an emergency service provider, we had a rulemaking on that. The major carriers stepped up, and literally in the last couple of days, they all met their goals for implementation on that, which is a terrific step forward. And we've also initiated a further notice on location accuracy, because as wireless usage increases, and particularly as it replaces what's wireline connections inside, and as GPS usage has increased, there's been a fascinating reality that location accuracy has actually declined. And we've got a notice going on how do we address that, because that's literally a matter of life and death. As you mentioned, we began the 2014 quadrennial review on media issues with an expedited delivery date. We closed a loophole that was being exploited to get around the ownership rules using joint services agreement. And we brought competition back to the retransmission consent negotiations. We have also continued to press on the reform issues that so many of you and I share in common as being important. Last time we were together, I told you we stood up a task force to deal with this. That task force came back with 154 recommendations. About 3/4 of those are now well along their way to being in process. They kind of break into two parts. There are procedural issues that you might associate with the Administrative Procedure Act and things like this, and there's also just how do you make the agency more efficient. And last week, as many have discussed, we opened a notice of proposed rulemaking on preserving and protecting the open Internet. It's important to recognize that there are no protections for an open Internet in place today. The January court decision affirmed the Commission's authority under Section 706 to deal with the open Internet and identified what I call a roadmap for how to achieve that. And what I have proposed is a method that follows that roadmap. I understand that there is a great debate on this issue. I heard the debate here this morning between those who say there is no need and those who say it ought to be a regulated utility. What we have tried to do is to follow the court's direction, the roadmap, the blueprint, and to come up with a proposal that stops blocking, that prohibits anything that degrades a consumer's access, including prioritization, that asks a broader question about prioritization as to whether it should be banned outright, and if so, how, and then engages in the discussion that we've heard already this morning about Title II versus 706 and collecting a broad scope of learned information on that. I've consistently said that there is only one Internet. There's not a fast Internet and a slow Internet. There's not special services Internet and non. There is one Internet. And when the consumer buys access to the Internet, they are buying access to the full Internet. And that's what our rules attempt to protect. This has become a debate among legal approaches, about legal approaches. It's a healthy debate. It's a debate that our notice of proposed rulemaking furthers with multiple requests for input. But my position has been similar to that of the Consumer Federation of America, and that is that we ought to explore the powers that are granted in the 96 Act, specifically Section 706, keep asking how Title II fits in, but develop a regulatory policy that looks forward, not backward, because what we need is a regulatory plan for the 21st century. And I look forward to discussing that with you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee.
Mr. Wheeler, Chairman, thank you for being here. We appreciate your work and your willingness to come and spend some time with us and respond to our questions. I want to pick up on the Middle Class Tax Relief Act, which, as you know, was designed to create a forum where broadcasters could volunteer their spectrum up for auction for mobile broadband use. Never been done quite like proposed, and you've got, we all knew that going in, but it seemed like a good balance. The critical term in all of this was that the broadcasters would volunteer to put their spectrum up. They wouldn't be forced into it. That was the agreement. Yet many of the actions that we've seen coming out of the Commission would lead some to believe that the FCC might be bullying broadcasters into giving up spectrum without providing hard data and clear models, so that the broadcasters can thoroughly and thoughtfully deliberate and choose to participate or not in this first-of-the-kind auction. Let me tell you what I'm thinking here. For example, the joint sales agreements that are now outlawed. These agreements essentially offer broadcasters a viable business model in small markets that would otherwise suffer from lack of service. You're considering increasing the attribution value of UHF stations such that more broadcasters could end up in violation of the national cap under the broadcast ownership rule. And the FCC has failed to process broadcasters' petitions for allocation changes from VHF to UHF, even though the petitions were filed prior to the Middle Class Tax Relief Act. And finally, you're seeking to use a modified version of OET 69. I'm hearing about this to repack broadcasters. This will likely result in reduced coverage for broadcasters that choose to stay in the business, making the business itself less viable. So the very people you're trying to incent to put spectrum up so that it'll be available for auction, I think are concerned about where the Commission's headed in a number of areas. Can you explain to me how these actions will actually encourage broadcasters to participate in this auction?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I think the goal here that we have been trying to follow is not to discourage or to encourage, but to follow through with our responsibilities. And that means enforcing and updating our
Do you think
rules.
any of these, though, do you think any of the things I've just cited encourage broadcasters to participate more? If you don't have broadcasters showing up with spectrum.
So as I said, Mr. Chairman, I don't think that we have an important, as you said, an important and historic role. This is an incentive auction.
I'm aware of that, yeah.
What we have tried to do in the Mobile Spectrum Holdings Rule, for instance, is to encourage broadcasters, wireless carriers to buy, which creates the incentive. The interesting thing, there was a report by one of the Wall Street analysts last week who said, we expect the greatest risk to this auction, broadcasters not showing up, just dropped. Because the fact that AT&T suggested that they're ready to bid between $9 and $18 billion for 20 to 40 megahertz, an analyst said, should send positive signals to broadcasters. So our goal is to create this marketplace, and we're not trying to take regulatory action in unrelated areas that would have.
But you are taking lots of regulatory actions, and it does have an effect on the marketplace. I mean, those two are. If we don't have these broadcasters coming to the table voluntarily, there won't be spectrum available. So I want to steal a line from the distinguished gentleman from Michigan, and this one I refer to as Mr. Dingle, to see if I can get just sort of some yes or no's here. Will you commit that the FCC will not score television stations based on their that's a yes, actually, that you will commit that you will not score it. Will you commit the FCC, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. You'll commit the FCC will ensure that broadcasters' costs to reallocate are covered by the $1.75 billion relocation fund?
We believe that that fund will be adequate. That's what Congress told us to spend, period.
And will you commit to completing frequency coordination with Canada and Mexico before the auction?
I think the issue there is what is the term complete. As you know, in the DTV transition, it never came down to actual signing on paper, but we understood where each other were, and I am very confident that we will be at that kind of a point.
Because that's critical. And will you commit to revoking only those low-power TV and translator licenses that are necessary to complete the auction?
Yes.
Thank you. And I think I'm out of time. So with that, I would now yield to the gentlelady, my friend from California, Ms. Eshoo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. a lot of things to discuss, but I want to bore down on or bore into some of the particulars on your recent proposal relative to the internet, on net neutrality. I've argued, many advocates for net neutrality have argued that paid prioritization represents a fundamental departure from the internet as we know it. I'm just kind of restating what is obvious, but I think that when you have hundreds of thousands of people communicating from across the country to you on it, that it is that it's important to raise. Now, as a policy, not as a legal question, do you think that paid prioritization should be blocked outright?
So I have said, Congresswoman, that I don't believe there ought to be haves and have-nots. Okay?
No, just answer my question. Just tell me, do you think that it should be blocked outright?
We have asked that question in the rulemaking. And what I have said is that I believe that under Section 706, anything that is anti-competitive or anti-consumer is competitively unreasonable and therefore can and should be blocked. And that becomes the trigger for how you deal with paid prioritization.
Yeah, now what happens...
On the question of per se that you asked, we've specifically asked how and whether.
Now what happens if the FCC determines that there's no outright, no way to outright create an outright ban on these paid agreements under 706? Where does that leave you? Where does that leave the country?
So when the court gave us our instructions, they talked about what they call the virtuous cycle. And that is that content drives the need for conduit, which then creates the opportunity for content. And that this cycle is what it is our responsibility to protect. And that's what 706 authorizes us to protect. And so what my proposal is that we take them up on that and we say if there is something that interferes with that virtuous cycle, which I believe paid prioritization does, that then we can move against it.
Mm-hmm. All right, but now let's move over to Title II. Title II is described, it depends on who's describing it. It's either a scourge, it's been compared to the early railroad regulations in our country, to being the flip side, you know, the savior title. I talked about in my opening statement about one of the imprimaturs of the internet has been consistent innovation. And while there are those that, and I understand why people would move to Title II, because they want the internet protected. And these values are, they're worth protecting. But I also believe that there is room for, in Title II, for heavy-handed regulation. And I don't think that, well, let me put it this way. I think that we need a light but strengthful legal touch in this, because the values are so essential. And people across the country and in the world, I mean, I'm hearing from people from different parts of the world as well, are calling for these protections. How would you envision, how would you handle constraint under Title II?
Well,
in terms of being the chief regulator.
So
as you know. Have you given thought to this?
Pardon me?
Have you given thought to this?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And as you know,
As some people say, share it with me.
as you know, Title II, there is nothing in Title II that prohibits paid prioritization. As a matter of fact, we have all kinds of paid prioritization
You're worrying me by bringing that up first, but anyway, go ahead.
So the question, no, because it goes to your, I think the root question of yours, which is how do you forbear from that? Okay, and so it is possible to go through and say yes, we will not do this, we will not do this, we will not do this. In the wireless context, interestingly enough, Congress created created wireless as a common carrier, but then specifically said, but this doesn't apply, and this doesn't apply, and this doesn't apply, and this doesn't apply. We can do that as a commission as well. It has been proposed that that's an approach to take. There are also those who throw up their hands in great concern over that because they say, okay, well, this commission may do this, but what about the next commission? And you can't bind a future commission by making those kinds of determinations. So what we have done in this NPRM is to ask the specific question about, here's Section 706, here's Title II, let's compare them and contrast them with each other and tell us what the pluses and minuses and the best ways to get through this are. And I think that leads us to the kind of answer that you're asking for today.
Gentlelady's time's expired. We'll go now to the gentlelady from Tennessee, Ms. Blackburn, the Vice Chair of the full committee, for her questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Wheeler, we thank you for taking the time to come and be with us. You've got a feisty term going over there at the FCC, and in Tennessee, we would say you're kicking up a little dust, and it's causing concern. Many of our content creators have a tremendous amount of concern about your approach, and many of our healthcare innovators who are looking at apps and telemedicine concepts and things of that nature are also expressing concern. And I think that probably your actions have inserted a good bit of uncertainty into the innovation sector that is looking at how we best utilize all things internet for quality of life and access, for economic development, for healthcare, for innovation. And I've got just a couple of simple questions for you. First of all, on cost-benefit analysis, and I thank you that last night your team sent a letter over to us on that question. But what concerned me was that in the letter you say that this is just a tool. Cost-benefit analysis is just one of many tools that would go into your decision, and your NPRM does not include an initial cost-benefit analysis. And your predecessor, Mr. Janikowski, in this committee came before us and assured us he was going to use this, and I'm actually going to read you his statement that he gave to us. He said, during my tenure, I've brought particular focus to this process, including by directing the early involvement of our chief economist in the analytical process of rulemaking, and by having FCC staff consult with the staff of the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs on best practices in conducting cost-benefit analysis. And I think that it is an incredibly important component of this, to look at what the cost of net neutrality rules would be to the consumer and also to industry. So I want to know from you, are you going to give us a commitment right now that you will conduct a thorough and extensive cost-benefit analysis of the actual cost to the consumer and to industry on these rules?
Thank you, Ms. Blackburn. I agree that cost-benefit analysis are crucial to decision-making, and in this rulemaking, we specifically ask what are the costs of one approach or another, and what are the benefits one or another, so that we can collect that information and have that kind of analysis. I agree with the importance of cost-benefit analysis.
Okay, let me ask you this also. You know, the commission's funding really comes from those that are regulated by the FCC, but we have some that are not, they're impacted by this, but they are not regulated and paying those fees. So in the net neutrality context, for example, companies like Google and Netflix want the FCC to act on their behalf and petition or visit the agency, if you will, in support of those efforts, but they free ride because they are not paying the fees and bearing that part of the regulatory burden. So since they seem so ready and willing to rely on regulation to help them with their business models, how would you recommend that those entities share in the cost, pay their part of the cost of funding the agency?
With all respect, that's above my pay grade. That's a decision that this committee and the Congress can make, and setting those rules.
I'm asking for what your recommendation would be. They come and they lobby you, and
So,
they're pushing the net neutrality rules, and while they may like what you are saying because they want you to step in, we have a lot of people out there who are paying the fees that are not in favor of what you are doing, and we have a lot of innovators who are not in favor of what you are doing, and your door has the name chairman on it. So I'm asking, what is your perspective?
So our effort in all of this is to represent the American people, not Company A or Company B. We have been told by the Congress from whom we can collect regulatory fees, and we do. If there is a decision that we should collect regulatory fees from somebody else, that's something we obviously will take. If there is a decision that we should expand regulatory authority over other entities, that's obviously something we should do. But that is a decision that is out of our hands.
I yell back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chairman recognizes the gentlelady from California, Ms. Matsui, for her question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Wheeler, I'd like to understand, given the success of the Internet in the absence of prioritization, precisely what types of paid prioritization you believe would speed the deployment and adoption of broadband Internet access services. Given that paid prioritization agreements would be used as a barrier of entry to startups and small business, what prioritization arrangements specifically would be better for the Internet than the no prioritization norm we have today?
What we are trying to do in this item is to say that anything that affects that virtuous cycle that the court talked about and I talked about before is not appropriate, is unlawful, and that would include paid prioritization. Now, the court told us to look at this on a case-by-case basis. We have asked the question in the rulemaking as to whether we should look at it generically and say it's all out. And we're soliciting comments on that. But you know, the concept of paid prioritization, when I buy Internet access, I am buying the full pipe. I am buying access to everything that's out there. And if somebody comes along and says, oh no, you can't get this unless you pay more, that's unreasonable and should be banned. If somebody comes along and says to a content provider, you can't get on unless you pay more, that's unreasonable, and that would not be permitted.
Okay, well, you know, as for my part, other than public safety, I believe pay prioritization should be banned. I also think another concern here is a last mile equivalent we're seeing and peering. The fact that there's so much uncertainty with paid prioritization is troublesome. If this concept moves forward, we could inadvertently block the next Google or Amazon from the market without even knowing it. I'm concerned that your hands may be tied here. Even if the Commission wanted to ban anti-competitive paid prioritization deals, you may not have the authority or tools to do so. Chairman Wheeler, if you were to explain to my constituents what is occurring in the market right now with the two mergers, content and peering agreements, and now paid prioritization, could be legitimized under a commercially reasonable standard, what would you tell them? Not just what it means for them, but also for competition and for economy as a whole.
I would tell them that I felt that paid prioritization was commercially unreasonable and therefore could be dealt with. And that on the question of peering, that is a separate issue that the Commission needs to look at and will be looking at. But I would emphasize that I am a strong supporter of the open internet. And I would also tell them a story that when I was an entrepreneur, I was shut out of cable systems because they were closed networks. And I would come with a new product and couldn't get on. And then when I was a venture capitalist before taking this job, that the companies that I was backing had to have access to the internet, could only succeed if they had access to the internet. So I would say to them that I believe in an open internet. I've experienced closed networks and the harm they cause to innovation, and that I want to protect and preserve an open internet.
You know, I think this is a very critical time when I have ordinary people practically off the street coming to me and asking me about all these things they've heard, because people today really depend on the internet. Ordinary citizens, the entrepreneurs who are concerned about this, and who else we may not know out there. So it is very concerning to all of us that there is a potential that we may have a situation where we won't have an open internet. And I would also like you to consider some of these mergers. I mean, we feel like we're kind of in a wild west of the digital economy now, and now with mergers coming forward. But can you commit to us, these large mergers that are before us, they may be different from each other, but can you commit to us here that the FCC will carefully scrutinize these deals with a focus toward public interest?
Without hesitation and with complete affirmation.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair now recognizes former chairman of the full committee, Mr. Barton, for his questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to echo the last question you asked Chairman Wheeler about low-power television. You and I are working on a bill, hopefully, to give them some protection. We understand under current law they don't have standing when they repackage, but we hope to give them some at least priority or some help if and when we do these repackaging of the spectrum. So I wanted to commend you for that last question. I've listened, Chairman Wheeler, to my friends on the Democratic side repeatedly talk about the open internet and whether you should try to regulate it under Section 706 or Title II. I think you're asking a false question. The internet is open. The question is, what does the FCC do in terms of monitoring to make sure that it stays open? And the analogy I'm going to use is not perfect, but I think it is instructive and educational. The airways that we fly back and forth from Washington to our districts are open, but they are regulated and monitored for a number of reasons by the FAA. If I call up American Airlines and I say I want to go from Washington Reagan to DFW, they quote me a price, let's say it's $350 one way. Well, when I show up with my ticket, I get one seat on that plane. I don't get to take 100 of my friends and put them on the plane with me because I happen to buy the ticket first and show up first. So it's obvious that it would be great for $350 if I could fill the plane. But we allow the airlines to price by volume. You want one ticket, it's $350. You want two tickets, it's $700. Maybe if you want to buy the whole plane, they do give you a discount. It's only $250. But we don't let the first person to buy the ticket use the whole plane for $350. And for all the bold talk about open access, what people are really trying to do is, you know, I want to pay a minimum price and get all this broadband, and I want to download everything from Netflix, and I don't want to pay if I download every movie they rent, or vice versa. Netflix pays a basic price, and they can service 10 million people instead of whatever it would be. So, you know, the broadband providers who have spent billions and billions of dollars and have networked this country and provided access through the competitive market principles are not going to somehow all of a sudden decide, as long as the FCC under your chairmanship make sure that it stays a competitive model, they're going to continue to provide an open internet, but they may want to provide based on volume of use, some sort of a pricing system that allocates if it is in a limited spectrum. I see no reason to try to shoehorn some sort of a regulatory approach into either Title II or Section 706. You know, explain to me why my approach, which is what we've been doing and which works, is the wrong approach.
Let me see if I can respond to both parts of your question. First, on LPTV, as I said to the chairman, we do not want to move those who don't have to be moved as a part of it. We also believe that there is opportunities to go to digital and the new efficiencies that brings, just like it did in the Class A stations. And thirdly, we're opening a new rulemaking to specifically deal with that. So, because we agree with the importance of low power and translators. To the second part of your question, let me take the chairman's hat on and put my consumer hat on for a second, because 2 weekends ago, I called my ISP and increased my capacity because I wanted faster throughput. And they said, for another $10 a month, we'll give you another, what turned out to be like 20 meg. That's a marketplace transaction. That's something that's accepted now. That is not something that is part of the open internet rules. What the open internet rules are trying to say is that when I buy that capacity, I've bought that ride to every place on the internet. That somebody can't turn around and say, oh, but you can't get that. Or somebody can't turn around and say, well, you can deliver that to Tom, but you've got to pay me an extra fee. And so the concept of the open internet is that I have bought this broad pathway, and I have the right to use it unfettered on an open basis. And that's what we're trying to deliver in this rulemaking.
I'm not trying to, my time's expired. I'm not trying to oppose that. But if you want, you're looking at it from the consumer standpoint, and I accept that everybody should have access. But if you are a provider of content, you should be willing to pay more based on the number of items you're going to put at any given time on the open internet, so that everybody has access to it. Because if you have a constrained pipeline, somebody has to make a decision how you put things into the pipeline, whether it's the airplane or whether it's the airwaves of the internet. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes the former chairman on the Democratic side, Mr. Waxman.
Thank you,
questions.
Mr. Chairman. Chairman Wheeler, I commended your leadership earlier in my opening statement about the spectrum auction. So I want to ask questions about a different subject, and that's net neutrality.
Yes, sir.
I commend you for tackling this issue and for seeking comment on a broad range of issues, but I have serious concerns about some proposals that have been discussed. You've said that there would be presumption against broadband providers like Verizon, AT&T, and Comcast entering into arrangements that give exclusive advantages to their affiliates. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What I don't understand is why this presumption against exclusive arrangements would be limited to affiliates. Suppose Netflix entered into an exclusive arrangement with AT&T or Comcast for faster speeds for its videos that block competitors like Amazon Prime from getting similar service. I think that would be a serious threat to competition and an open internet, yet your proposal does not create a presumption against these exclusive arrangements. Why would you allow any exclusive arrangement that guarantees some content providers faster speeds than competitors can access?
Thank you, Mr. Waxman. This goes back to this virtuous cycle that the court talked about. You know, it was interesting. Yesterday in the Wall Street Journal, there was an article that interviewed a bunch of infrastructure manufacturers about the impact of net neutrality. And they flat out said that if you offer fast lanes for some, you're going to degrade service for others. And I think that's at the heart of what we're talking about here. That would be commercially unreasonable under our proposal.
Okay. The problem with exclusive arrangements is that they would let some companies block their competition from similar advantages. In markets where there is no or only limited choices of broadband providers, that would stifle openness and competition. I just want to say to you that I'm opposed to any form of paid prioritization. Paid prioritization divides the internet into the haves and the have-nots, and it will entrench the big companies at the expense of startups. My understanding is that you've asked comment on a multi-factor test for determining when paid prioritization is permissible and when it would be prohibited. My concern is that this will create a lot of ambiguity and a lot of litigation. I believe bright lines would be much better for the market and for innovation. So I'm going to ask you to consider a presumption against all paid prioritization as you develop final rules. Will you agree to consider this option?
Absolutely, and we have asked in the NPRM specifically whether, and if so, how do you accomplish it? So that is a ripe debate that is in the NPRM right now, sir.
Okay. My understanding is that the reason you have proposed a complicated multi-factor test is concern about the court ruling. And I agree that if you are limited to acting under Section 706, your options could be limited. But you are not limited to Section 706. You could establish a presumption against paid prioritization under Title II. And that's why it's so important for you to use your Title II authority as backstop authority. You don't have to settle for a weak open internet rules if you exercise your full powers. And I'm glad you're looking at that possibility. Let me close by thanking you for seeking comment on the backstop proposal in the proposal adopted last week. I'm committed to working with you to ensure the Commission adopts strong and open internet protections for consumers and innovators while encouraging continued investment in the online content and services we all rely on and enjoy today. I think it's important that we get the substance right. We've tried 3 times, we, meaning you, at the FCC, because of the concern that the consumer have full access to what is on the internet and full access to be able to use the internet to its greatest maximum potential. And I would hate to see that net neutrality in any way be diminished if we have an opportunity under the law as we look at it to make sure that we get the substance right.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Waxman.
Thank
Yes,
you,
sir.
Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back his time, and now turn to the distinguished gentleman from Ohio, the Vice Chair of the Subcommittee, Mr. Latta.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And again, Chairman Wheeler, thanks very much again for being here. There's been some discussion on Title II, and I'd like to follow up on some of that questioning. Central premise of Title II regulation has always been that the regulation was a substitute for competition. And two parts for the question then. What types of findings has the Commission made to justify entertaining the idea of Title II regulation of the Internet? And then, do you believe the FCC should have to make a specific showing that of a market failure before imposing rate regulation or reporting requirements that are the precursor to rate regulation?
So, again, these are the kinds of questions that we have tried assiduously not to decide on, but to ask about in this rulemaking. We're going to have to make a decision on exactly those questions at some point in time. But what we want to achieve is a record that gives everybody the opportunity to opine on that so that we can be appropriately informed.
Well, let me ask, what's your time line on that then?
So we've got 60 days for comments and then 45 days for reply comments.
Okay, so are you saying then that you're not ruling out rate regulation?
I'm saying we have asked the question about Title II and the full panoply of Title II. Yes, sir.
Okay, well, let me ask you this. What have you been hearing from the community thus far, especially when you're saying that you're going to be asking those questions? What have you been hearing out there?
Excuse me. Well, we've heard very little on the record thus far. There has been a great outpouring of people speaking to us through the press, people speaking to us through letters and this sort of thing. And as I indicated at the outset, there are two diametrically opposed positions. One is that you should not do anything, and the other is that it should go all the way to being regulated like a public utility. And our job is to find that which is best for consumers and best for encouraging investment in the Internet, which itself is best for consumers.
Let me go on with this question. While you've resolved some of the issues in the 5 gigahertz rulemaking, there are a number of issues outstanding that have the potential to open up another 195 megahertz of spectrum for unlicensed use. What is the FCC's and your plan for tackling the open issues?
In 5 gig?
Right.
So you actually think about 5 gig in 3 bytes. The first byte we've dealt with. That's the lower end of 5 gigahertz. In the middle component of 5 gigahertz, there are lots of national defense kinds of activities, radar and this sort of thing. And the question is, how can you work out sharing arrangements there? And we're working with those parties. On the upper end is where you have spectrum that has been identified for intelligent traffic, ITFS kinds of activities. And that is based around an 802.11 standard. There are strong feelings about the need to protect that. I believe that it's possible to work together to meet both sets of needs since it's based around a common 802.11 standard.
Yeah, in my remaining time, let me ask this last question. The FCC's 2011 Universal Service Transformation Order requires phone companies to set minimum prices that they can charge their consumers if the provider wants to continue receiving the same amount of funds from the USF program to support the high cost of their business. So as a result, many of our rural consumers, a lot that I represented out there, will see the rate floor go from $14 to about $20.46. And while the Communications Act requires rural rates to be reasonably comparable to rates in urban areas as affordable, reasonably comparable does not necessarily mean that the rural rate should be exactly the same as the urban rate, when the rural customer might be able to call only a few thousand people locally, while an urban can call many times more than that. And then should the rate be the same in the rural areas where the average income is significantly lower, then it might in fact not be as affordable. The rate floor continues to be a concern for many of our telecommunications providers in my district and others servicing rural America. While I understand that the FCC has agreed to phase in the increase at $2 per year and propose that start date until, or postpone that start date until after 2015, can you explain why the FCC interprets the reasonably comparable rates to mean exactly the same rates between urban and rural areas, considering the smaller population in the rural calling areas, and the fact that it was what is affordable in the largest urban areas is not what is also affordable to the consumers in the rural?
Thank you. I'm glad you asked that question. It's an important question. So as you stated, we're supposed to make sure that things are reasonably comparable. The reason for that is to make sure that the subsidies that some Americans are paying to deliver service to other Americans don't end up being subsidies that some Americans are paying to reduce the bills of other Americans, but to overcome the high cost of getting to them. In some instances, it has been, unfortunately, the former. There are, in 16 states, there are situations where consumers are paying, some consumers are paying $5 a month for telephone service because they're being subsidized by people in your district and other districts. We need to get our arms around that. So what we've done is to say, okay, step one is goes into effect January 15. And then what we're going to do is, and that can't be more than $2, by the way. And then what we're going to do is go back out with another survey that hits the kind of granularity you were talking about in terms of service and including long distance and all these kinds of things, so that we have a better understanding of exactly what comparable means, and then look at that issue again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My time's expired, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes the Chairman Emeritus of the committee, the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Dingell.
Mr. Chairman, I thank you for your courtesy, and I commend you for holding this hearing. I'd like to welcome our old friend, Mr. Wheeler, back, fine public servant, and we're looking forward to good things of him. Mr. Chairman, at last week's open meeting, the Commission adopted a number of big-ticket items, including a new net neutrality NPRM and draft rules for the upcoming incentive auction of broadcaster spectrum. Concerning the former, I commend you for your efforts to keep the Internet open, and we'll be watching the matter closely as it goes forward. It's my hope the Commission will work with this committee to ensure that any final action it takes to conform to its statutory authority, especially concerning Title II reclassification. Now, with respect to the incentive auction, I'm interested in what the committee intends to do about treating broadcasters fairly. My questions will require a simple yes or no answer.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to begin with a parochial matter. Section 6403B1 of the Middle Class Tax Relief and Job Creation Act specifies that the Commission may, subject to international coordination along the border with Mexico and Canada, reassign and relocate and reallocate broadcast frequencies. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, Chairman Wheeler, in the Commission's July 2, 2013 response to my letter of inquiry about the reverse auction, Gary Epstein, head of the Commission's Incentive Auction Task Force, stated the following: the language used in Section 6403B1 of the action is, quote, identical to that used by the Commission in describing its handling of the earlier DTV transition, in which the Commission adopted our proposed allotments for these stations subject to our continuing negotiations with Canada, notwithstanding the broadcaster's request to the contrary. One here could reasonably assume, based on the statement, that the Commission may reassign and reallocate broadcast frequencies pursuant to the Act while negotiations with Canada and Mexico are still ongoing. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
I'm going to ask you to submit for the record how you're going to assure protection to the broadcasters and the viewers in that process.
Yes, sir.
Now, Mr. Wheeler, does the Commission believe that concluding negotiations with Canada and Mexico prior to commencing the reverse action will give broadcasters, particularly in border regions, greater certainties and likely to increase their willingness to participate in such auction? Yes or no?
Yes, sir.
Now, Mr. Wheeler, does the Commission expect to conclude negotiations with Canada and Mexico prior to commencing the reverse action next year? Yes or no?
The expectation is, it is the goal.
You may not make it, is what you're saying.
It is the goal, and as I answered you in your previous
Will you
question,
notify this committee as soon as that becomes likely or dangerous?
Yes, sir.
Now, in this matter, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to state for the record that it's my understanding, based on exchange with counsel at the Energy and Commerce Subcommittee on Communications and Technology, December 1, 2011, markup of the act that border negotiations are to be completed before the Commission reassigns broadcast channels. I hope that Chairman Wheeler will honor that understanding. I hope, Mr. Chairman, you understand I have great apprehensions about that because of the impact it could have on the broadcasters and also on my constituents.
Mr. Chairman, this is, I share your deep concern about this, not only because of the very legitimate concern you have about your constituents and other Americans getting service along the border, but also the cantilevering effect, if you will, as it then, as spectrum allocation then goes into the middle of the country. I can assure you this is an incredibly high priority. I can also assure you that our Canadian colleagues have been very forthcoming and very helpful.
I would like to have this submitted for the record in response to correspondence. Now, Mr. Chairman, I note that the Commission proposes to use a method called, quote, scoring to set individual prices for each broadcast station participating in the reverse auction. Is that correct? Yes, sir.
It is one of the things we're considering. We have not made the final decision yet.
There are others?
We're looking at others.
I'm going to ask that you submit in response to correspondence a proper answer on that particular point. Now, Chairman Wheeler, is the Commission concerned that scoring as opposed to competitive bidding will decrease broadcasters' willingness to participate in the reverse auction? Yes or no?
No.
Now, Chairman Wheeler, in general, do you intend to work in good faith with broadcasters as the Commission refines the rules for reverse auction in order to see to it that their needs are met as the Act specifies, to the best of your abilities? Yes or no?
Absolutely.
I want to quote Admiral Rickover, who once observed, "The devil's in the details, but so is salvation." I'm hoping you're going to see that the salvation is there, and not just that we are going to find ourselves amidst trouble because of carelessness, not by you, but by some of your over-enthusiastic and less than competent predecessors. I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time's expired and yield back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Shimkus, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Chairman Wheeler. Welcome. I'm going to try to get through three pretty quick points if I can. As you know, there's a lot of concerns on this side of the dais on this Title II debate.
Yes, sir.
And the basic premise is, for me, is how do you build out? We want more, not less. Does a regulated monopoly incentivize more build out, more pipelines, or does a competitive, capital-intensive, incentivized, market-driven process? I believe the second. So that's, we've gone from copper to cable, coaxial cable, satellite, cellular, fiber, a lot of different ways for data to now flow. And we want to encourage that. And I kind of like the idea of incentivizing people who want to use more, making them pay more, to incentivize those who carry. Someone may want to build out more. So that's kind of where I come from. My position is more pipes, not less. More pipes, not a regulated pipe. Competitive markets versus controlled markets. So, because here's an example of that. On May 16th, the Wireline Competition Bureau released a public notice seeking comment on state regulation of dial-up internet traffic. Dial-up. I mean, it's a dinosaur. It's hardly used. So there is no, you want to talk about uncertainty for the state and for the providers when we're still in this process more than 15 years after the FCC first discussed the treatment of dial-up. We're now to this process. So that's just kind of a statement. That doesn't create certainty. Would you agree?
Well, what we're trying to do, Mr. Shimkus, is to create an environment that assures consumers and those who rely on the internet that there is openness, while at the same point in time encouraging investment.
But let's just go back. I get that, but this is dial-up.
No, well, we still. So if we're dealing with the dial-up, that's a different.
Well, it is, but it's not, because it's the whole debate about certainty, and if we actually have a dinosaur application, that why are we even in?
So we still have 40% of our consumers on dial-up telephone lines. One of the challenges that we have is how do we evolve that into an all-IP environment, which would be, an internet-like environment. One of the things that I have said to this committee is that we believe that this IP transition is a crucial part. And how do we make sure
I get it. I'm going to try to make less.
Okay, sorry, sir.
And one deals in both of our sweet spot is kind of the public service, 911,
Yes, sir.
the Spectrum Act, called for the creation of the Do Not Call registry and the automatic dialing issue. The commission keeps saying there's not enough money to do this. I would ask you to check into that. I think there's a lot of money in the FCC. And because obviously this automatic dialing freezes up lines and it's a public safety concern, and I would hope that we would work together to try to,
I would
take this
look
under
forward to that, sir.
consideration.
Let me get back and I will come see you.
And myself and the ranking member have kind of been better involved in these
Great.
issues as you have in the early days also. The last thing I want from rural America is kind of just there seems to be a de facto freeze on this shared service agreement. And this is in the broadcast sector, as you know, the local. When you represent a third of the state of Illinois, as I do now, 33 counties, these shared agreements are now helping to provide, and we've got real-world cases, better local service to the local folks than less. And I guess the basic question in my last minute is what's your plan to ensuring that the FCC action on television transfer application is predictable, consistent, fair, and timely?
So, thank you, Mr. Shimkus. What we have done is to put out a public notice on how we look at transfers. And I consider this to be a procedural reform, because the way it used to be was broadcasters would come together in some kind of a merger situation, and they would come to the commission, which was a black box. that had constantly changing, well, this, we'll look at it this way, we'll look at it that way. And what I wanted to do was to say, okay, what are the things that we will look at so that everybody has notice, everybody understands, and it is not a black box. And that's the process that we have now established to be able to make those kinds of decisions.
Thank you. I know my time's expired. I appreciate it. If you keep me in mind as these things move forward, it'd be helpful.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Colorado, Ms. Daggett, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to follow up, Chairman Wheeler, on this discussion about the Open Internet NPRM. Leading up to the Commission's vote last week, there was a robust public exchange among ISPs and edge providers and others about the impact of paid prioritization on their business models. And as Ms. Matsui said, we've been hearing from a lot of our constituents about this as well. Now, you talked very briefly about, a few minutes ago, about what the FCC is doing in its review process to look at the effect of paid prioritization on consumers' broadband bills. Wondering if you can comment about what you think the proposed open internet rules will have on access to new and innovative content online, because that's one reason why we're concerned about these proposed rules.
It should be encouragement of new and innovative programming because of the fact that it assures that they will be able to reach the consumer unfettered and without having to pay special fees.
And what impact do you think that the rules will have on average broadband speeds, network investments, and overall quality of service?
That's a terrific question.
Thank you.
I'm glad you asked it. You know, one of the fascinating things is that 2010, when the open internet rules were first proposed, since then there has been hundreds of millions of dollars of broadband investment made. So the rules don't seem to have a chilling effect. And speeds have been doing this, going up. This is what the court was talking about when they talk about this virtuous cycle. Because everything in the internet ecosystem, everything adds to everything else.
So what do you think that the new rules, what effect will they have on these issues?
I believe...
You just talked about what's been happening.
Yeah, we believe that the rules that we have designed will continue to encourage investment in broadband, continue to encourage increases in throughput, and as a result continue to encourage innovation from edge providers.
And so are you saying also then average broadband speeds will increase?
Yes, ma'am.
And overall quality of service will increase?
Yes, ma'am. They need
right. Okay. One last thing no one has raised yet is the issue of industry consolidation. And this year we've seen two major merger proposals in the telecom industry. Now, clearly the industry is going through a period of significant technological and economic change, and some folks think that consolidation is the best approach to this. So all things being equal, do you think industry consolidation is good or bad for the consumers?
So I read the other day that we are probably in the last decade, the biggest year for telecom mergers. And what we're doing is opening a record on each of them, and we'll make that decision based on the record that is developed for each.
So you don't have an opinion at this point?
I would not want to prejudge the record.
Okay. And as you know, Congress has recognized the importance and unique character of the telecommunications marketplace by giving the FCC the authority to review mergers under the public interest standard. Do you think the conditions the FCC placed on the Comcast-NBCU merger were effective at promoting the public interest?
Oh, wow. You know, that That is something that, a decision that my predecessor made. I know that it had impact. My goal is to look at the record that we presented before me and my colleagues and make a decision on those.
Do you think it promoted the public interest, yes or no?
I think that there were multiple things in it that promoted the public interest.
And what other lessons do you take away from the Commission's previous attempts to promote the public interest by placing conditions on mergers as you go forward?
That it is an important role that the Commission has. You know, there's a lot of discussion as to why should there be any authority at the FCC to look at public interest obligations. I strongly believe that there is a big difference between the kind of statutory rigidity that the Justice Department is required to look at mergers with and the kind of broader public interest issues that you've raised that the statute asked the FCC to look at.
So, Mr. Chairman, I just ask if you could supplement your testimony with some specific takeaways that this has given you.
Great.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair now recognizes, I'm sorry, the chair recognizes.
Gentleman, you'll just say
the chair recognizes the chairman.
I just wanted to clarify one thing, make sure I heard
Yes,
it
sir.
right. That, did you say 40% of Americans are still using dial-up for internet access?
No, I'm talking about dial-up phone service writ large.
All right, because I was thinking it's more like 3%.
no,
doing
dial-up phone service
Thank
writ
you.
large.
And I thank the courtesy of the
Thank you for clarifying that, sir.
Thank you. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Nebraska for 5 minutes, Mr. Terry.
Thank you. Well, it's good to know that my 82-year-old father is in the 3%. That makes him very elite. I'm trying to talk him out of that, but that's a work in progress.
We all remember those days when we were thrilled to get 56 kb, right?
Yeah. So, switching gears just a little bit, I want to ask about quantile regression analysis progress, and I do think that you have probably captured its deficiencies better than anyone else has, and I appreciate that work. I was glad to see the Commission's follow-up by repealing the QRA formula.
Yes, sir.
So congratulations, I appreciate that. I'm curious on your thoughts of how it should be replaced, and if you could walk me through what factors are going to be used in any decision-making and timetables and process.
I respect the question, but I can't really answer it right now because we're in the process of, there's several proposals, and we're in the process of looking at what the best components of each are. And I don't want to hip shoot here, but we do have proceedings underway to say, okay, what is it we replace QRA with?
So if those, where are we within the process of those?
I think that we're probably heading into something that you would see before fall.
Before fall?
Early fall.
Okay.
Football season.
But, well, I don't want to get distracted.
Well,
so
if you join the Big
do that when we play McNeese State, and I would appreciate
Yes, sir.
that. For the rest of you, that was humor. Now, then let me go to a broadcast question, since we succinctly dealt with one I thought would take all of 5 minutes. The spectrum bill that was authorized in the incentive auction and passed through the committee was a bipartisan bill. Unfortunately, the order that recently removed the FCC was not bipartisan. And some commissioners, particularly Republicans, that stated that the order treats TV broadcasters that choose not to participate in the auction unfairly, and that has me concerned. Congress set aside the $1.75 to reimburse broadcasters forced to move part of the incentive auction or aim to fully recover their expenses. Why did the FCC not adopt the number as its repacking budget and ensure that broadcasters would not have to go out of pocket when forced the FCC to move?
Thank you. Congress said $1,750,000,000 is the max that can be spent on repacking. We think that will be sufficient. There have been broadcasters who have expressed a concern that it might not be sufficient. So we have said, okay, we don't think that's going to happen, but we will put in place a process that will have a structure in place if and when that should happen. Sir, I don't expect that we're going to get there.
All right. I'll just yield back my time.
Thank you, sir.
The gentleman yields back, and the chair now recognizes the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Matheson, for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Wheeler, thanks for your testimony. I appreciate your candor and your articulate way you answer questions.
Thank you, sir.
I also want to commend you on your efforts to open up more spectrum for unlicensed uses. The FCC took an important step last month by opening up the 100 megahertz for spectrum for unlicensed uses in the 5 gigahertz band. And I'm pleased to see in your testimony that the FCC is actively participating in ongoing efforts to free up additional unlicensed spectrum in the 5 gigahertz band. Can you provide an update on where things currently stand with resolving the technical issues in the ITS band currently used for vehicle-to-vehicle communications and the parts of the band used by the DoD for military radar?
Yes. So as we talked, there's 3 slices to 5 gigahertz. There's the lower slice that we took care of. The middle, as you suggest, is DoD. We're having ongoing discussions with them. I have been personally involved in those discussions as to about a wide range of spectrum issues, including this. There are strongly held beliefs on both sides, sir. I continue to believe, however, that people of good faith can find answers if you sit at the table long enough. And that's the goal. Insofar as the high band in 5 gig, yes, that's intelligent transportation, which offers such great opportunities with, we've seen the Google Smart Car and all this sort of thing. The thing that's really encouraging is that that's an 802 type of standard. It's not a dissimilar reality, however, where we need to make sure that people are sitting around the table looking for commonalities rather than looking for differences.
Something we ought to do around Congress a little bit.
You have a little
Just
experience.
an editorial
You have a little
comment
experience
on my part, yeah.
But that's the goal of what we're trying to do here.
Do you have a sense of do you have a time frame for when this additional spectrum could be freed up?
I wish I did. I would be misleading you, sir, if I gave you a date right.
I understand. Another issue I want to mention, the administration's Connect Ed program,
yes,
the goal to bring 100 megabit broadband to every school in the U.S. To the extent that this initiative is implemented through the E-rate program, what can the Commission do to maximize efficiency and get the most bang for the buck?
Wow. Thank you. Great question. There are multiple challenges in that. One is that we need to spend our money, the people's money, on 21st century high-speed broadband solutions, not 20th century solutions like dial-up telephone service and long distance. Right now, about half of the $2 billion, $2.4 billion that's being spent is spent for old stuff, not new.
Today, half
today,
still being
today. Second part is that we have to design a system that helps schools and library administrators find their way through the maze that is telecom. I mean, we put them in those jobs to educate students, not to be telecom whizzes. So we're trying to develop a process that says, you know, here's what you ought to be paying. Here's what somebody next door is paying. Here's like situated, so that they can go in and understand where their bargaining position is. We're going to be talking about being able to have longer contracts, because buying it on a monthly basis, as we all know, is the worst way to buy. So let's talk about several years. We're going to be encouraging consortia so that you can buy in bulk and get better prices. And I just think that there are a myriad of things that we can do to get more efficiency out of the existing bucks, and we intend to do that.
That's great. Does the FCC plan on using the National Broadband Map to identify fiber that is already in place in a given community, so it could be leveraged toward these Connect Ed goals?
Absolutely, and we've now taken over ownership of the broadband map, so yes, sir.
Okay, appreciate that. I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you very much. The gentleman yields back the balance of his time, and the chair now recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Lance, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to you. I believe that some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would prefer a Title II reclassification. And if the Commission were to decide to proceed in that direction, I'm concerned that it might trigger a lot of ill-fitting regulations that might not make sense in the context of these services. In your opinion, Chairman, would the process of going through forbearance to separate the wheat from the chaff, could it be a messy exercise, and might it lead to more years of litigation and uncertainty is my real concern, sir.
Thank you, Congressman. That's one of the things that gets teed up in the NPRM, and we ask about Title II versus Section 706. And I presume that will be exhaustively discussed in the responses. And that's exactly the kind of questions that we're asking.
Thank you. One concern has been raised about the proposed net neutrality rule, making process protections that would be afforded companies who use a carrier that's providing the same service as another carrier. For example, the large carriers are beginning to bundle services that go well beyond phone service, the internet and television, to include smart home services such as temperature control, home health monitoring, which of course is important to another subcommittee of this committee, as well as alarm services such as monitoring of home intrusions and fires, video surveillance, or personal emergency response systems. What protections will the FCC provide to ensure that a carrier does not give its service provider a preference over a company using them as a broad-based carrier?
I'm not sure I exactly understand what your concern is. Will there be preferences among providers of those services?
Yes, Chairman.
That's contrary to the concept of an open internet.
So you can assure us, and through us the American people, that that will not be the case as these other services are provided moving forward.
Let me give you an example personally.
Yes, sir.
I just switched out ADT in my home security system for another company. I was able to access both of them over the internet and both of them over my mobile device. And there should be no interference with my ability to move from ADT to the other provider.
Thank you. And that's the goal of the Commission, and you will assure us that is how we will proceed moving forward.
It's open. There needs to be open access for all providers.
Well, thank you. I look forward to working with you. I understand you're a proud graduate of Ohio State. Is that right?
You bet. Yes, sir.
Please be gentle with Rutgers now that Rutgers has entered the big, whatever it is, the Big 16 or whatever it is.
It's the Big 10 that can't count.
The Big 10 that can't count. I defer back to the chairman the balance of my time, a proud representative from Ohio.
Well, thank you very much for the gentleman yielding back the balance of his time. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Butterfield, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Chairman, for yielding time, and thank you to you, Chairman Wheeler, for your service, and thank you for your testimony today. I especially thank you for your clarity. I told you that the first time that I met you, and whenever I hear you speak, it is unambiguous, at least until the subject of your home security system comes up, and then you are a little ambiguous on who the new provider is, but thank you so very much. Mr. Chairman, in the Communications Act, Congress mandated that the Commission ensure diverse participation in media and telecom, and that includes participation of minority and women-owned businesses. The quote from the statute basically says that the mandate is to promote economic opportunity and competition by disseminating licenses among a wide variety of applicants, including small businesses, rural telecoms, and businesses owned by members of minority groups and women, end of quote. It seems to me that that the response of the Commission to judicial criticism of the FCC's inaction in this area and the lack of meaningful study and progress, as well as the low level of minority and women-owned participation in media and telecom licensing, that the Commission seems to me is not committed to these diversity goals. And if I am wrong about this, I would ask that you correct me. On May the 14th, members of the Congressional Black Caucus, including Congressman Rush and myself, addressed these concerns, these diversity concerns, in a letter to you. I suppose the letter may not have made its way to your desk yet, but I ask that you look at it very carefully when you do. Question: what precisely do you need beyond the congressional directives and judicial criticism to get the Commission to make progress in creating opportunities for diverse communities?
Thank you, Congressman. And I got the letter this morning, so thank you. First of all, I agree that we have a mandate to have a broad swath of opportunity for all Americans to participate in all aspects of telecommunications. I can assure you that that's a goal of mine. Now let's talk about some specifics. Number one, I think what we did on the JSAs in the broadcast space actually opens up opportunities for minority and small operators. That's why it was supported by more than a dozen representative minority groups. Secondly is we are going to move on the AWS-3 auction to make sure that there are appropriate steps taken to assure that minorities can participate through waivers and other kinds of processes in that auction. Thirdly, we are going to have, and I should pause and all of these call out Commissioner Clyburn, who has been the constant pusher on all of these issues. There will be designated entity rules for the incentive auction that will create bidding credits for appropriate designated entities. I very much take to heart, both as an institutional responsibility and as a personal responsibility, the language that you read.
And so when the spectrum is auctioned, you are making a commitment that diversity will be an overriding concern of the Commission.
So what we want to do is to make sure that there are opportunities for designated entities to get bidding credits so that, for instance, they can bid with 75-cent dollars against AT&T and Verizon's 100-cent dollars.
All right. Let me get this last one in if I can, Mr. Chairman. In light of the demographic changes occurring in our country and the growing number of mergers in the communications industry, how is the Commission encouraging companies to partner with diverse businesses in the secondary market?
We have been doing that in both formally and informally, that there are great opportunities when there are transactions for minority companies. Grain Telecom, for instance, comes to mind, which is now operating spectrum, I believe, for both AT&T and Verizon. which they purchased as a part of some settlements with the Commission. And those kind of opportunities are important and worthwhile. I also believe that, that there can be new opportunities in the broadcast space, particularly after the auction, in terms of being able to share spectrum and offer other kinds of services.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Guthrie.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming today. I know you had a busy week, so your time is appreciated. My colleague from California, Ms. Matsui, and I have spent a lot of time on spectrum issues, and we founded the Congressional Spectrum Caucus.
Yes, sir.
And a
Thank
goal
you
of
for your
looking
leadership.
with different ideas of how we can move forward on spectrum. And I appreciate the efforts that you've done to move the incentive auction forward. And I have a couple of questions about the guard bands and the 680 megahertz band. It appears to me that the band plan for spectrum cleared in the broadcast incentive auction carefully considered the importance of maximizing licensed spectrum and adhered to the technically reasonable standards set by Congress for creating a duplex gap. And I applaud the Commission for its work in this area, in this regard. Two questions. One, how do you foresee going forward with unlicensed spectrum in the duplex gap? As you know, it will be important for those who bid on adjacent licensed spectrum to have assurance there will not be interference. And are you confident the FCC will have technical guidelines to provide assurance to those who bid for licensed spectrum there will be no interference in the duplex gap from unlicensed?
Yes, sir. I think you just, the answer to both, you just identified technical standards. And so, for instance, we're going to have technical standards proceeding for wireless mics and others who would be using the unlicensed spectrum. So, yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. And we've been using social media to reach out to interested Americans, and we said we're here for representing the American people. And one came from Kelly on Facebook, and it's, Kelly asked this question. Well, Kelly submitted through Facebook, username Kelly, who would like you to ask you the question about your plans for future spectrum policy. And can you give Kelly a brief answer to her question about what do you, just broadly, future spectrum policy? Overall.
Thank you, Kelly. The answer is that, you know, they're not making it no more. And so what we have to do, I believe that we are today on the cusp of the new horizon on spectrum policy, with two things that we are doing. One is the incentive auction that you all created, because when you boil everything down, it ultimately comes to economics. Mm-hmm. And if you can address the other person's economics, you can probably go a long way to solving your economics issue. And that's what the auction does. The other component is spectrum sharing. And the days of here, this is all yours, you use it, are over. And fortunately, digital allows that kind of sharing. You know, think about going into a Starbucks and everybody is sharing that Wi-Fi spectrum. You put those two together, and that's, I think, the answer to Kelly's question as to where is spectrum policy going. And we're in the middle of making both of those work right now, which is why what we're doing is so terribly important.
Yeah, I'll often use the metaphor, and it is a very simple metaphor compared to a complex physics in this, but we don't have special highways for ambulances or fire trucks. We get out of the way when they need to go down the highway. So sharing that's a kind of a simple way to look at a metaphor. There's something in one of your statements, and I'm putting my hat as a former state legislator. So I was a state senator in Kentucky before here, and there's been some concerns of places like Utah and Oregon where there's been municipal broadband deployed and the projects have failed in areas where there were competitive providers. And these projects have resulted in putting millions of dollars of taxpayer-funded municipal bonds, property taxes, sale and franchise taxes at risk. And I believe the iProvo was sold to Google for $1 and leaving city taxpayers on the hook for repayment of tens of millions of dollars. My understanding is 5 states or so have passed laws saying that cities can't do this because the states usually, I know in our area, if something happens to a city, the state's kind of on the hook for it as well. And I believe in your written testimony, you said that you believe the FCC could do preemption in this area over the state law, and I just wondered if you'd clarify that.
Yes, sir.
And why you think Washington could have a better view of this than Frankfurt, for example, in Kentucky.
So there are about 20 states that have put some kind of restrictions in place. And I see it through just exactly the opposite end of the telescope, with all due respect, that if the citizens of a community want to organize through their local government to bring competition in broadband provision, they should not be inhibited.
Not be inhibited by their elected representatives.
They should not be inhibited by the fact that the incumbents have been urging the adoption of legislation that would ban it. And if we believe in competition, we ought to let competition flourish. So what I have said is that I'm following, again, Judge Silberman's comments in his dissent, nonetheless, in the open internet case, in which he said if there's ever an example where 706 would apply, it is in the ability to say to states, you cannot get in the middle of this virtuous cycle and prohibit consumers from being able to have access to a competitive service.
So your perception is state governments are doing that because of the incumbents or because they don't want to be on the hook for an iProvo type situation?
So I go back to first principles. That is, this is a decision that ought to be made by the people of the community, and that that if they want to take the risk, if they own it themselves, but you don't have to own it yourself. It is also, the gentleman from Utah has left, but for instance, in Utah, there's a group of cities that have banded together to solicit bids for somebody else to own that they would have a participation in. That kind of structure, if the people say that's what we want this kind of competition, then I think they ought to be encouraged to get it. And competition has clearly been shown to be the best tool.
Well, I don't disagree with you on that, but my time actually has expired. I know the chairman's ready to gavel me down, so I'll yield back. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The chairman would never do that to the gentleman from Kentucky. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Vermont, Mr. Welch.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Wheeler, I have 5 questions. We have 5 minutes, so we can go lickety-split.
Yes, sir.
First thing, Bob Ladd and I started the Rural Caucus. We so appreciated you coming in. Enormous concern in rural America that we get access to the internet. It's essential for our future. Net neutrality is a big deal. That's the big topic. You've been getting comments. There's an enormous amount of concern that if we make the wrong decision, the big guys are going to get the fast lane. The little guys, many in rural America, are going to get the breakdown lane. Can you give us some reassurance that at the end of this process, we're going to have access on equal terms for folks in rural America to the internet?
You want a quick answer? Yes.
Yes.
Sir. Yes.
And that's the sentence. You can give a full sentence to reassure all of us, especially rural America, that we're going to be driving in the fast lane.
There is one internet. There is not a fast internet. There is not a slow internet. There is not an urban internet. There is not a rural internet. There is one internet. Okay. Everybody ought to have open, equal access to the capacity delivered by the internet.
Okay, thank you. Now, getting the internet. Rural America is spread out, and the investors want to put their money where they can make the money. We all understand that. That was true for electricity, but we've got to get that internet out into rural America so we can be part of the modern economy. And we have a universal service fund with the mobility fund. We need to have that, and I'm wondering if you could comment on the status of that and what we need to do to make sure that the funds are there to build out that broadband.
Specifically on mobility, here's the interesting question that gets raised by mobility. Broadband wireless is LTE. It is being built out across America. Recently, just one of the major carriers announced a new initiative in rural America with LTE. The question becomes that we're wrestling with is, should we subsidize something if it's already happening? And that prudent fiscal responsibility suggests probably not.
Well, I got 3 more questions. So
Okay.
we want to work with you on that, to make it rational and not have us investing in things that aren't working, but invest in things that are going to help rural
Yes, sir.
America get this.
That's where we're trying to get to.
All right. Third, we've got to work with you and your entire commission, the Republicans and the Democrats. And when you came into our rural working group, you explained a couple of problems you had, ancient IT, and also procedures where I guess it's easier to hire a lawyer than an engineer.
Yes.
I'm a lawyer, so maybe I'd like that, but I wouldn't be very much use to you. What are the things that this committee can advocate to help your entire commission, Rs and Ds, who want to do the job so you have the tools you need to do it?
Thank you for asking. Our IT infrastructure is worthy of the Smithsonian. I came from a business background. The things that you cannot do that are common sense in the business world. The fact that we're still using computers that have known cyber risk associated with them. The fact that we can't organize a consumer complaint process online for American consumers because our IT system isn't up to it is ridiculous. So we have serious problems there. On the issue of lawyers versus engineers, far be it for me to take a side on that, but we do need more engineers, sir.
Okay, thank you.
And economists.
Right.
And economists.
Okay, well, I'd like our committee to work with you on that. Next, Section 706. There's a lot of concern about whether you have the sufficient authority under that section in order to give you the rulemaking power to guarantee the outcome being net neutrality. Can you comment on that? Do you still feel that that is sufficient and the court gave you a roadmap forward?
I think that we do have sufficient authority, and then when the court talked about this virtuous cycle, and they said anything that interferes with that virtuous cycle is a violation of 706, that is a very broad grant of authority.
Okay, my last question in 26 seconds. Retrans consent in blocking online content. We've seen that in the broadcast area where there's a dispute and people can't get access to the signal. Now that's starting to migrate into the online content. Is this the beginning of the cableization of the internet?
Sir, I think it is the right question. Our authority goes to the retransmission and program access goes to the authority of good faith negotiations. I think there is reason to be concerned when, because I happen to subscribe to an ISP who is in a dispute with a program provider, that the program provider blocks all access from all IP addresses coming from that ISP. I think that is something that is of concern, and that we all should worry about.
Okay, I yield back. Thank you very much, Mr. Wheeler.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Pompeo.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here today. I don't want to spend a lot of time on net neutrality. We have a different view. I view it as nothing more than a price control. I think we've seen how that works in creating supply, and so I think it's a very dangerous path that you're headed down. I do want to ask a couple of process questions related to that. Have you spoken to anyone at the White House or OMB in the last month regarding net neutrality?
Only to keep them appraised. They have been assiduous in their recognition that we are an independent agency.
And did you call them or did they call you?
I called them.
And has anyone else on your staff spoken to folks at the White House or OMB in the last month?
Not to my, well, the answer is I'm sure. on this issue, I don't know, but I can assure you from my discussions with everybody, from the President on down, the recognition of the independence of our agency, and I'll go further and assure you that never have I, or to my knowledge, any one of my staff felt any pressure to decide any issue.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I want to follow up on something Representative Guthrie was saying. You believe the FCC has the a power to preempt state laws that ban competition from community broadband?
Yes, sir.
Under Section 706?
Yes, sir.
Do you believe that states have the same authority?
I think that that's the issue that I believe is, do we have the authority to preempt? That raises the question of what is the authority of the state. I think we have peremptory authority. I think we'll probably end up having this answered in court.
Look, I just read the statute. The states have the same authority that the FCC does. The language is identical. It says you whatever authority is, you have and they have.
Well, and it says state commissions as
Right.
well. Yes,
So there you go. So
and
state
it says that
commission.
we have peremptory authority over state commissions.
So state commissions have the same authority that you do. You'd agree with that?
No,
I mean, it's a simple statute. I mean, it just says the same thing.
No, I think that it says that both of us have authority, but that we have peremptory authority on this issue, and I think that's what Judge Silberman was saying in his dissent in the Verizon case.
Right, not law, dissent. Chairman Wheeler, the FCC's Media Bureau recently issued new, they call them processing guidelines for broadcast transactions. And these broadcast talks not only about future broadcast transactions, but also pending applications. I have three questions with respect to that. First, how many applications have been singled out for close scrutiny since that new guidelines have been issued? How many have been approved in those 2 months? And when might those broadcasters see the resolution of their applications?
I don't know the answer to any of those three off the top of my head, but I'll be happy to get it for you for the record.
Okay, you can understand these are pending applications submitted under a set of rules. You've now moved the goalpost on them. This is
No, actually, yes, sir. I understand your point. What we're trying to do is not move the goalposts, but to open up the process so that everybody knows what the rules are.
But it's what you did. I mean, you changed the rules with respect to applications already submitted under a pre-existing set of standards. So I don't know how you could describe that as anything but moving the goalposts.
With all respect, sir, we had a series of transactions that were in place, and in the decisions on those transactions, we said, note, going forward, there will be a new look at what financial structures are in transactions, not in these transactions that we were approving. Then we put out a public notice that said, here is how we are going to open up this black box, and here is what is going to be going on. And it is that standard. So there was notice as a part of a decision that was not affected. Then there was notice through a public notice. And now those that the Bureau is reviewing are subject to both of those.
And my last 20 seconds, and with net neutrality, there are also cybersecurity issues. Do you plan to explicitly give network providers liability protections in their efforts to protect their networks from cybersecurity as part of your rulemaking for net neutrality?
It was not considered as a part of the rulemaking to have that.
Great. Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time.
Thank you very much. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New Mexico, Mr. Lujan.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Chairman Wheeler, thank you so much
for
being here as well. Chairman Wheeler, 2 weeks ago, this committee added my amendment calling on the FCC to conduct a study on reforming the designated market area system to the Stella reauthorization bill. As you know, DMAs are currently defined by a map drawn by Nielsen, a for-profit marketing research company, based upon the reach of television broadcast antennas. This network of antennas is based upon technology deployed back in the 40s and 50s. Americans could have a multitude of viewing options via technology such as cable, broadband, and wireless internet, but current DMA rules prevent the viewership of much of that content. I believe that a system embraced by these technologies could revitalize television broadcasting, with new affiliates reaching viewers who have more in common than their placement on Nielsen's old maps. It is my hope that the Commission takes this study seriously and bring the policy into the 21st century, Mr. Chairman. So I hope that we might be able to work.
Thank you for your leadership on this, Mr. Lujan, and that I assure you that we will take it seriously.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, it wasn't too long ago that a company would not allow access to another company's apps. There was question a few years ago with AT&T and FaceTime and an Apple product.
Yes, sir.
As I talk about fixed versus mobile. They defended it by saying it was allowed under the FCC's net neutrality rules. Granted, this was under 3G. Section 62 of the proposal suggests the no blocking rule was applied a different standard to mobile broadband internet access, and mobile internet access service was excluded from the unreasonable discrimination rules. We're seeing mobile getting faster now, and with the new spectrum auctions, even faster than fixed. I appreciate and I agree with you that we're talking about one internet with open and equal access. With my colleagues in rural areas, I've shared with you before, if there's a conversation about taking phone calls and with bandwidth capabilities as well as streaming of content on airplanes, in rural America, we should be able to get the same treatment. I don't understand why we're not there yet, but nonetheless, it's coming. So I'm hopeful that as we have this conversation, that we're able to have equitable treatment. I know that there's, as I've read in the proposal, that there's elements of asking for a look into this in the rule, but I'm certainly hopeful that this will be treated with the same scrutiny and level of attention. And again, as I talk about an old antiquated rule within the 40s and 50s, we talked about dial-up, that this is another area that we're going to have equitable treatment as well, especially with new gigabit access as well. Mr. Chairman, in another area, I know that there's a number of my colleagues who join me in their concern for recent reports of interconnection deals, particularly the one between Comcast and Netflix. You stated that peering is not a net neutrality issue. There is a matter of the open internet, and there is a matter of the interconnection among the various disparate pathways that become the internet. And while I understand that net neutrality refers only to the behavior of internet service providers blocking or throttling the speeds of certain websites, my question is, how is an interconnection agreement that essentially throttles content substantially different?
So, thank you, sir. That's a very good question. You can think of the internet in three parts. There is actually four parts. There is somebody like Netflix getting on the internet and then writing so-called middle mile providers to a peering point, which is just a fancy word for interconnection, where they then have access to Comcast, Verizon, whoever the case may be. The consumer buys from their computer up to the peering point. Traditionally, peering has been, I'll take mine, you take yours, back and forth kind of a thing, and for free. That has begun to change over time.
If I may, I apologize. My time's going to elapse, and maybe what I'll do is if we could get that into the record. All that I would add is, once upon a time, peering agreements didn't have an exchange of money. People found a way to work with each other. And I'm hoping that we can get some certainty with the treatment of fixed versus mobile in that area. And lastly, I'd like for the record, if there's any way that you might be able to provide us more specifics and details with what's been talked about as commercially reasonable as well, as we talk about not putting smaller companies at a disadvantage. I apologize to cut you off, Mr. Chairman. I could always sit and visit with you. And the last thing that I would say is President Obama is in support of an open internet, and I would encourage you to speak with him. So thank you very much for that as well.
Let me just, Congressman, so am I.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Scalise.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having the hearing, and thank you, Commissioner Wheeler, for being here today and answering our questions. I know as we look at the potential changes that have been proposed, a lot of us that want to continue to maintain a free and open internet want to make sure that we're going about it the right way. I know I've got some concerns with the fact that the FCC would even consider going the Title II route in terms of reclassifying broadband. You know, and a lot of us had reached out to our constituents to have them also give us suggestions on things that they would like to ask you as well. And a lot of the comments that we got, I know that I got in my district, were just concerns about maintaining that open internet and keeping the government out of regulating it in trying to make sure that the government doesn't impede the ability for the innovations that we've seen, which have been so dramatic and revolutionized not only the country, but revolutionized the entire world. And it's a lot of innovation that's made in America, and we want to continue to see that innovation thrive. When you look at going into the reclassification, and it's a proposal that's out there, I know, like I said, I've got concerns about that, but in your written statement, you assert that the private sector must play the leading role in extending broadband networks to every American. If it were to be reclassified under Title II, who would pay for extending those networks if they're subject to common carrier regulations?
The private sector.
But then when you look at the Title II route, would the FCC have the authority to regulate broadband pricing?
So in the vastness of Title II, that is conceivable. One of the reasons that we are asking for Title II versus Section 706 comments in this proceeding is to be able to specifically zero in on what are issues such as that. What are the
So you think
pluses?
you may have the ability to regulate broadband pricing? Is that something you think would be an open
No, that's-
possibility for the FCC?
Should a full Title II regime be chosen, which it has not been, we're proposing.
But you're making the proposal.
Section 706.
Right.
No, we're not. What we're doing is we're proposing Section 706 as the approach, and then we've asked questions about Title II. And these are the kinds of issues that will come up in that discussion, and that are going to warrant serious consideration.
If you deem them telecommunication services, because that puts broadband into a different realm than it is today. It's not there right now. If you do choose to try to put it there, would state public utility in our state, we've got a public service commission, would those state public service commissions and other related entities in the states be able to regulate broadband at that point?
So what we have proposed is not Title II, is Section 706. What we have asked is for a discussion of Title II and those kinds of issues. But our proposal, for which I've taken a lot of heat, is not Title II.
Well, you don't have to go forward with the proposal. You could stop taking the heat right now. And
no, I've said
pull that back.
I said that Title II is on the table, that we're willing to look at Title II, but and Mr. Waxman has a specific proposal where he thinks that Title II ought to be a backup, and that's a proposal that is important and worth considering. But the proposal that we made is Section 706.
Let me ask you this, because you're also, it seems like a one-way street where you're just targeting this towards internet service providers. Now, there are a lot of content carriers out there too, content providers that, a lot of members have used the Netflix example, or, Google, and other content providers that also have a play in this realm, that you seem to just be targeting this towards internet service providers. And so I'm not sure if there's some axe to grind there, but it just seems like it's a one-sided approach that you're taking even in the review. Again, I wouldn't recommend going down that road for any of these folks, but just wanted to point that out. One last thing, because I know I'm running out of time. In a February report, the FCC, some of your staff in a working group recommended eliminating some of the reports that are out there, the Orbit report, the International Broadband report, and modifying video competition report, and cable pricing survey, some of those things. I've got a piece of legislation we've passed out of the full House twice now, very bipartisan, I think it was unanimous earlier in this Congress, called the FCC Consolidated Reporting Act, which really tries to take a broad view and to eliminate a lot of the outdated reports, to streamline the reporting process, something that I think you've seen bipartisan support to do in the House. We're trying to get the Senate to take that up. I'm not sure if you've got a comment on what you think should happen there, if that's something you're supportive of generally, especially as it relates to the bipartisan bill in the House trying to move through the Senate to ultimately become law, to streamline the processes as your staff has suggested in some of these areas.
So on the Senate side, it's Senator Heller who has been pushing on this, and I know that he and Senator Rockefeller are talking about it in terms of their package of legislation over there. I definitely agree that that there is a plethora of reports, and that we are spending a lot of time that could be better organized, shall we say.
Including competitiveness in the telegraph industry, which is still on the books, which we're trying to get rid of in this bill. But appreciate that, and anything you can do to help us advocate for the advancement. I do think that's one area where we found a lot of bipartisan support. Again, the way it passed the House, hopefully we can get the Heller bill moved through the Senate as well, and get that to the President's desk.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much for your time, and yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Scalise. I do not see any member on the Democratic side. Mr. Kinzinger of Illinois is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here today with us. I know it's a long
Thank you for your
day.
patience, Mr. Kinzinger.
Yeah, you're welcome. I might be the end. Wow. So, but we got a lot of big issues we want to talk about. I'm just going to hit a couple right now. I'd like to talk to you a little. I know it was touched earlier about the E-rate program. I'm a big supporter of the intentions of this program, and especially its modernization. And I appreciate the Commission putting on the recent workshop on this issue. I have a few concerns I want to address. I represent a rural district with a number of very small schools and libraries. And over the past few months, I've reached out to a lot of these entities and asked them what their concern is, and asked them about their participation or their lack of participation in the program to see what concerns or issues they have with the program itself. The number one problem raised in these conversations was the complexity involved in both applying for and eventually receiving the funding necessary to move forward in implementing new technology in their facilities through the E-rate program. In hearing this, I actually looked into the issue a little further and found out that the basic application for funding, this is the process of it, but the basic application is 17 pages long. And with additional technologies not deemed necessary, it can run even longer, i.e. Wi-Fi. I would actually probably rather punch myself in the face than be the guy that has to fill this out. So the complexity of the application process has actually caused a number of these schools to spend money on outside consultants to help guide them through this process. And this is money that's no longer being spent on our students and automatically puts many smaller rural schools at a disadvantage as they don't have the funds necessary to pay these outside consultants, essentially leaving individuals in a technological desert, if you will. As the Commission continues its efforts to modernize the E-rate program, what are your plans to simplify the application process for these small and rural districts? And also, will you commit to working to address the issues faced by these schools who have routinely told me that they simply cannot afford to pursue these funds?
Congressman, I share your shock and dismay. We're going to fix it.
Good. All right. Do you have an idea of a time frame? How long?
Yeah,
It's
going to be part of our E-rate modernization program that we're bringing forward. There's actually a series of things that we're going to begin administratively even before that rulemaking takes place. It is. Yes, sir. I mean, I'm as, you know, how do we get online? So it becomes an interesting challenge. So here we are talking about broadband access for schools and libraries, and we have a 17-page paper process.
Right.
So unfortunately, it's not something you can solve just like this because, as I indicated, I think to Mr. Welsh, we have awful IT systems. But what I would like to get to is for your schools and all schools and libraries to be able to get online, to make their filing, to be able to track that filing and where things stand, and to do it less frequently than annually.
Right. Well, I appreciate that. I want to touch on one other quick issue in the short amount of time. And again, thank you for your consideration with the E-rate issue. I'm concerned with the process and policy rationale used to change the FCC's treatment of broadcast JSAs for the purpose of the broadcast ownership rules. The decision to count TV JSAs as ownership has the effect of tightening ownership restrictions without the comprehensive review of the ownership rules that is required by statute. And your analysis seemed to lack an appreciation for the public interest benefits fostered by JSAs. In Rockford, for instance, an area I represent, without these agreements, the Fox station produces actually a Hispanic newscast, and they've said that they will not be able to produce that Hispanic newscast, for instance. Well, I don't believe my local TV station should have to fight for a waiver, and we can have a broader issue on the whole discussion in general. I do want to say, in light of your rule, are you going to make sure that these stations can take advantage of waivers, and will there be clear, transparent standards for applying for waivers in this process?
Thank you, Congressman, because you've raised a really important point about waivers. The reality was why we had to deal with JSAs is there was becoming a cottage industry in this town, down on K Street, of lawyers figuring out creative ways to get around the ownership rules that the commissions had in place forever. And JSAs were a favorite way of doing that. What we have said is that you have to have attributable ownership, as you indicated. But that there is a waiver process to address exactly what you're talking about in Rockford. And yes, is an expedited process. And it is it's a situation, unfortunately, where the process took over and perverted the underlying rules and the basic concepts of ownership.
We can and we can have that broader discussion when I have more time. My time's expired, but I will say I've heard a lot of concerns from local TV stations, even in my district, and I hope that, you know, while we disagree with the rule, I hope that you make it very clear how they can apply for these waivers and how they can get this taken care of. Mr.
Yes, sir.
Chairman, I'll yield back, and thank you.
Thank you very much. On behalf of Mr. Matheson and of myself, thank you, Chairman Wheeler, for your testimony this morning. We look forward to working with you in the future, and the hearing is now adjourned.